good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everybody wherever you are across the world tuning in today. Thank you for joining us. So just a few technical bits for me to begin with. So if you can just make sure you are muted throughout, please, and cameras off, it can just help with bandwidth for some people. There'll be a Q&A session at the end. So if you can, if you see at the top there, you've got the chat function. If you'd like to type your questions throughout, and we'll address them at the end. Or if you'd like to come off mute and speak with the speakers today, then you're free to do that as well. So before I pass you over to Jans to introduce our speaker, we have a message from the sponsor of today's webinar. A long-time partner of BOHS, Casella, have kindly opted to sponsor today's session. And from Casella, we have Tim Turney to tell us a bit more about who they are and what they do. So I'll pass over to you, Tim.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. So I'll keep this relatively quick. So Casella's been involved in occupational hygiene measurements for many years, making instruments for noise, air sampling, and vibration. Now, we haven't got anything to measure burnout, but we feel it's important to support anything that can prevent ill health in the workplace in general. So really excited for this webinar. It's really good using new industrial hygiene principles to prevent burnout. It's something I've not heard of before, so I'm really looking forward to see it. So you know where we are if you need any instrumentation, and hopefully look forward to seeing you in future webinars and seminars all around the world. So thanks everyone, and looking forward to it. I'll hand over to Jans now.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you very much. So, well, hello and welcome everyone again for the third time this year. And once again, I'm so excited to see such great attendance. I can see many familiar names as well as first-time joiners with us today. My name is Jans Babkovic, and I'm an occupational hygienist with a passion for the art and science of workers' health protection. I also volunteer for the BOHS, where I have this great opportunity to organize educational webinars and bring like-minded people together to share knowledge and experience. So today we have a very important topic to talk about, and perhaps something that is often overlooked. We as occupational hygienists and health and safety professionals dedicate our lives to preserving the well-being of workers. We pride ourselves on being able to anticipate, recognize, evaluate, and control occupational hazards for people around us. However, we often forget to apply the same principles to our own well-being, which may lead us to exhaustion and burnout. Unsustainable workloads, stresses of day-to-day life, anxiety caused by uncertainty, and peer pressure all take a toll on our mental health. And when left unaddressed, it can severely compromise the quality of our life and subsequently the quality of the work that we do. To follow the paradigm of occupational health, prevention is better than cure, and no one has a better set of tools to prevent burnout than occupational hygienists. So the question is, who could help us to recalibrate our analytical mind of an industrial hygienist to mitigate burnout and take care of our mental health? Well, I think I know just the right person for this task. I'm thrilled to welcome our speaker, Subina Colligan. Subina is a certified industrial hygienist, health and safety coach, and consultant at S. Colligan Coaching. She is a US Air Force veteran, executive coach, and chair-elect director of the board of Global EHS Credentialing. She has dedicated her efforts to community, leadership, and influence for occupational health and safety professionals. And today she will share her wisdom on mitigating burnout with industrial hygiene principles. So without further ado, please welcome Subina Colligan.
Thank you, Jens. I want to take you everywhere with me to introduce this topic. That was absolutely incredible. I am going to, I am so grateful to sit down and have this conversation with everyone because what Yan said is so true. We are the perfect people to anticipate, recognize, evaluate, and control with partnership in our organizations. But what makes this topic so special to me is the true belief that occupational hygienists, environmental professionals, safety professionals are the perfect people to protect humans, to give them safe work environments and also healthy environments, inside and outside of their work. That's literally what we do. And what we know is that when people are safe, and when they are in healthy environments, that's where they can start to thrive. That's where innovation really takes way. And that's what helps to evolve our world. So that's why this topic, amongst a couple others that we'll talk about later on, is so, so important. And I'm so grateful that you all have decided to spend that time just to hear a little bit more about it. I also want to say thank you. We work in a profession that does not always get the recognition that we deserve, but I want to say thank you for everything that you do. There are people in this world that have no clue that you have dedicated your efforts to preventing and protecting them in the workplace. And that has a significant impact on how they go about living their lives. People go to work to create a quality of life, and you support that quality of life for them. So thank you. Today's talk, I don't know if I could do it any better than Jens did, but we'll talk about a couple of things regarding mitigating burnout, but in a different approach where we talk about a little bit of the facts, the impact on business, and then really dive deep into that AREC principle. I'm Sabina. This is my favorite picture of me. My hair turned out perfect. If anyone has ever had a bad hair day, this is my favorite. I've had many of them, but this one is the best hair day I've ever had. I'm an occupational hygienist. I'm an executive coach and strategist. And really what that means is that I love solving problems. I love hearing what's affecting people and then coming up with long-term strategies. And people often ask me, like, why in the occupational hygiene field did you decide to start coaching? They don't really go together. Coaching is not a technical field. And that's simply because listening and traveling the world, listening to occupational hygienists all over the place, we are missing some of those leadership and support capabilities that our peers have within organizations. Marketers have coaches, finance folks have coaches. And then I learned that as you're moving through these executive ranks, director, senior managers even, a lot of companies have it in their leadership development plan to have coaches for these individuals because it's so important. However, in the OEHS profession, we don't have very many people that understand what we do and can coach to our specific leadership needs. So I ended up with an executive coach, made incredible movements in my career. I still have a coach. I will always have a coach. And I decided that this is something that I could bring to the rest of the profession. In terms of strategy, though, it's hearing what people are feeling or missing and creating long-term plans. And that is my problem solving kind of skill. I'm a visionary. I like to look forward. And this piece, I was able to take it to multiple places with me in my career. But the challenge and why I'm actually here today is that at a certain point in my career as an occupational environmental health and safety manager, I experienced an extreme bout of burnout. It was so bad that I had to call out of work, and I was gone for 2 days, and I just sat on my couch crying, and I decided I was going to quit being an occupational hygienist, and I was going to start a juice bar, because there is nothing that is more stressful than what I was doing. And pumping juices out of fruit and veggies could have been so much easier for me. And I realized that as I was going through my business plan, and I had this big plan of what all I could do, my spouse said, well, now you've got this big juice bar. What do you do with all of your earnings? And I said, well, I would get a private jet and send people around the world to do work with Workplaces Without Borders. And at that moment, I realized I just love this field too much. It's not worth giving up. I needed to find a different way. And so I got to use different things. Being an occupational hygienist was one of them. And then the business approach to strategy, to figure out a way to not only bring myself out of burnout, but to bring my team out of burnout. And that shifted the impact on business that we had. We went from being the worst region in my company, with injuries, quality incidents, and just overall morale. And this was documented through our safety culture surveys, and also from our ISO 14001 registrar saying, if you don't get it together, we're dropping you. To 2 years later, and this is why we say strategy, because it takes time. 2 years later, we had a 30% reduction in injuries, and that was year over year. Our ISO 14001 strategy or registrar came in and left with 0 findings and more best practices. They actually left half a day early because they could not find anything against us. But there was also a shift. Our senior vice president and his executive vice president came in, and when they sat down to talk about safety, the room didn't look to the chair I was sitting in. Each member of that executive team, every director, every senior manager, the general manager, stepped up and said, this is what we're doing. And in fact, I only talked about one slide, but every time safety came up, someone in the room was anchored in that, where that was not the case before. So a team that is well equipped, that is ready, and that can be there mentally, physically, and emotionally to thrive is so important. So that's why burnout and talking about these strategies is important. On top of that, here's a fact for us. Burnout, which has been a phenom and sensationalized throughout COVID, actually was classified by the World Health Organization in 2019. So before COVID happened. This is not, it didn't get classified as a medical condition, but it did get classified as an occupational phenomenon. So something that we have to take care of in the workplace. And that is so important to know, because sometimes we look at things just because it's the headlines. But what we know is that the headlines, we didn't have a lot of time to sit with this in 2019. A few months later, we were knee deep in COVID, but it's so important to know that it's recognized and we do have a responsibility to do something about it. And back to that big picture in terms of the impact on business. So I mentioned to you earlier that we had a situation, and where it made the most sense was we had a highly skilled team. And on the left side, that's what we're hired to do. Occupational hygienists are extremely skilled at what we do. We're intelligent. We know how to utilize our tools. We have tons of resources, hundreds of years worth of research to go back to. And then we have a conversation about behavior. And behavior is actually what your actions are or your reactions are to a stimulus. And when we talk about what that stimulus is, we're talking about burnout today. But whatever your business behavior is, there's an impact on business. So what we want to do is have positive behaviors in the workplace, right? Like that's kind of what we do. But if the stimulus, the conditions in our workplace are negative, then we can have a negative impact on business. No matter how skilled you are, if you don't have the capacity to do the work that you are tasked to do to create this product or solution for the business, then it has a negative impact. So we're going to talk specifically about behavior. Skills can be taught, skills are learned. That's what we went to school for. That's why we have continuing education. But when we look at the big picture and our impact on business, one area that we can have a really big impact on is behavior. I talked about my burnout story and how I had a team. My team and I were all really, really smart. We all were passionate. We all cared. But the way that burnout shows up in the workplace, and we'll talk a lot about that, can have an impact on behavior. And when that behavior is negative, it has a negative impact on the business. We had high injury rates. We had a negative outlook from all levels of the organization, and even outside stakeholders took issue with our program. When we intentionally took time to take care of and embrace what needed to be done about the burnout that team was experiencing, we started to exhibit more positive behaviors. Our skills didn't change. Yes, we took continuing education courses, but those technical skills never shifted. What did shift was the intentional intervention around our behavior, and that turned into a 30% reduction year over year in injuries. Our registrar saying, "Good job, keep it up," and our executive leadership team being more vested and buying in. And ultimately, we got more resources like headcount and money to make sure we were doing the things we needed to do. But that burnout had to be addressed to impact our behavior. Perfect. Now, everything in my life is seen through these 4 windows: anticipate, recognize, evaluate, control. This is the foundation of what we do, and it is so important when we talk about burnout. So we'll go through each of these. The anticipation will be first. It's a little unorthodox to say, well, what are we anticipating when we talk about burnout? Because we're not necessarily talking about someone getting cancer or having hearing loss. What we can take a look at is the evidence that has been presented to us. So earlier this year, McKinsey and Company did a survey of about 15,000 people, 14,500. And what they saw was that burnout has an impact in these areas. The big portion is job satisfaction. If you are not happy in your life and it's because of your occupation, job satisfaction is a big thing. But it also impacted intent to leave, depression, the feeling of burnout, distress, anxiety, and work engagement. So what we're anticipating is this negative impact on these areas, which you don't want to have. You don't want people to want to leave, to hate their job, to not be checked into their job. We're here because we know that burnout is an issue, and we're anticipating that. What I love about this presentation is that it's not just about the single, but we're talking about multiple areas here because each person experiences burnout different. And I mentioned that last piece because there's also evidence that when you are burnt out, workplaces have higher toxic behaviors. And since we're focusing solely on the toxic behaviors, we want to talk about how burnout and toxicity kind of interact with each other. So I'm going to ask you to drop in the chat, if you're willing, what you think about toxic behaviors and burnout. Do you think that if a person is working in a workplace that has toxic behavior, that they are more likely to experience burnout? Based off of the data that was collected, that answer was yes. Toxic behaviors and just really had an impact, but we're also looking at people intending to leave. And the impact on business that has is significant. If you have low levels of toxic behavior, you're less likely to have burnout symptoms. But if there are high levels, you're 7.6 times more likely to report symptoms of burnout. 6.9 to 52.5 is a huge jump. And the same goes for people's intention to leave. And the last slide, that was one of the areas that we're anticipating. So you go from 8.2 to 52% of people said they were intending to leave in the next 3 to 6 months. What I hear is that they are actively looking for a job. And quiet quitting is probably in their practice, where they are just not having high levels of engagement. These are all things that we're preparing for, but when you're having that high level of turnover, that can have a negative impact on our business. So we want to talk about toxic workplaces, the toxicity that comes from these toxic workplaces as well. All right. We take all of that information, just kind of setting the baseline, the foundation of like, why should we even care? How does this even apply? And we're also anticipating around these 6 functional areas. So what researchers around the world have agreed on is that there are about 6 areas that contribute to burnout. And if 3 or more of these are out of whack, then people are more likely to experience burnout. However, these are also areas that we can anticipate, that we can plan controls for, that we as managers and individuals can take a look at and say, okay, how do I plan to make this work? The first is autonomy. This is having some control. This is also the place where flexible work schedules show up, where people are saying, I want to have more control of my life. Workload. This is directly a responsibility of our workplaces. How much work are people having for the resources that they have available to them? Values. We're seeing this more in our early career professionals, but it shows up across the spectrum of people actively in our work environments. If they want their values to match and the values of the company to be in line. So if people value quality time with their families, they may value more flexibility in the work practices that are employed by their employer. Fairness. How are people treated? People want to be treated fairly. Community. Our diversity, equity, and inclusion models, the conversations, they are so important. If there's no connection to people. There's just it's harder for people to be their authentic selves, and it's just harder to show up and want to be a part of that group. When we talk diversity, equity, and inclusion, I also want to mention that belonging is a big deal. Just because you fit does not mean you belong. I can fit my foot into a size 5 shoe, but I wear a size 9. My foot does not belong in that shoe. But maybe I can get it in there. It's scrunched. I might be in pain later. But that's the difference. And then reward. People have different ways that they like to be rewarded. Some like words of affirmation. Others prefer quality time or time off, tangible gifts. These are different ways that people feel that they are recognized for the work that they do. All of these fall into areas that employers, managers can set up for their workforce. Also, when each of these areas is positive, these directly align to job satisfaction. So back to our very first slide where we're anticipating each of these areas being positive and or negative, and what our offset will be. So what types of controls we will have in place for those. And for each of the areas, anticipate, recognize, evaluate, and control, I will provide a tool that can help with that satisfaction. So for anticipate, state interviews. This is so easy to do. We do exit interviews, but when someone's out the door, adios, I'm out of here. I have nothing else to say to you. State interviews are very easy to do, to plan every 3 to 6 months, where you're asking, are you fulfilled in your job? Why do you stay here? Is there anything that you would like to learn in the next year? People that feel heard are much more likely to stay. They're more invested. They have more acknowledgement for what they do. Monthly feedback. So this is so important because you can have feedback mid-year, end of year, or you can have those monthly feedback sessions. They don't have to be more than 15 to 30 minutes to just talk about the performance of the person and the organization. They can have very simple questions. My monthly feedback asks 3 questions. What has been going well in the past month? What has not been going well or not moving in the right direction? And what is it that any personal goals that you have to achieve? And if there are new goals, do you have the right support for those? How can I help? 3 questions. People know exactly what to expect from me. They come in ready with those questions. Sometimes that meeting is only 15 minutes. Sometimes we need to reschedule and have an hour-long meeting if something is just not working and it's more than what we can do. However, people know that they have dedicated time from their manager to get this done. And the last piece is plan. We're anticipating what could happen, and we are coming up with controls, and we'll talk about this piece much more in depth in the control section. Recognize. Burnout shows up different for different people. Here's the challenge that we are met with. When we're talking about burnout, it's individual. Recovery from burnout is individual. Prevention is actually a responsibility of the workplace. So when it's showing up, when we can actually recognize it, it's different.
Sabina, I think we lost your mic for a second. You went on mute.
Oh, perfect. Thank you for that.
You're back now.
So on our physical side, we may have, frequent headaches, our sleep habits may change, stomach pains. Those are all physical challenges that are individual. You don't necessarily see someone and say, man, they look like they have a headache. Jade always has a headache when she comes into work. So these are physical attributes that people need to be equipped to see, to ask themselves, why is this happening? Is it because I ate a bad, shepherd's pie? Or is it because my workplace is impacting my physical health? It can show up mental. You can have a sense of failure and self-doubt, feeling helpless, a loss of motivation, cynicism, which will show up especially when
We lost you again, Sabina, on the mute.
That's so odd. I'll keep an eye on it. I don't know why it's muting. So one of the areas for mental is, feeling helpless and trapped, a loss of motivation, a lack of satisfaction. Those are all areas that show up mentally. These are some that you can see as a manager, especially when you have that high motivation person or someone that is really positive and they're starting to question themselves more or show just like we said, a loss of motivation. And then behavioral. This is something that managers and peers will and the behavior side is actually one that we can test. So if you see someone that's just withdrawing a lot more, especially the person that would normally raise their hand, say, hey, procrastinating, that's another one. Individually, if you have a to-do list and you're like, why do I just don't want to do this? There may be some symptoms of burnout happening. And then absenteeism. This is one managers specifically can take a look at and really question. So if a person is saying, hey, I'm not here, I'm not feeling it, asking the question as to why they are consistently calling out and not just assuming that they don't like their job anymore. And a lot of the evaluation piece or recognition piece ties into the evaluation. So we'll have more tools there, but I do want you to recognize some of the behaviors of toxic workplaces. A lot of times there are individuals that are more likely to have these behaviors. And again, we're talking about the impact on business. And the one place that we are really good at shifting and can be more controlled is that behavior piece. So there are 12 areas that people that are exhibiting toxic behaviors show up. And I won't go through all 12 of these, but if you read any of a few of them, it's just not a good place to be in. Treating people as if they were invisible, number 12, that does nothing for community. Public shaming or status degradation does nothing in terms of that community and reward system. So really taking a look at these in terms of recognition. And I love that these are eggs because we don't quite know if it's a chicken or egg event at this point. So if you are experiencing burnout, you can have these negative behaviors, that cynicism, that kind of disconnection and withdrawal. And that can lead to some of these toxic behaviors at work. If you're withdrawing, then you may have a rude interruption to just be done with that. I'm done. I don't have anything to say. And so it can lead to some toxic behaviors if you're already in burnout. And then you have people that just have negative behavior and negative impact on business that exhibit these toxic behaviors. And that can lead to burnout as well, and also have an impact on your intent to leave. Evaluate. This is my favorite part. So once you have recognized that maybe something is going on, it doesn't have to be bad. I didn't mention this earlier, but I'm actually a yoga instructor as well. Love all things taking care of people. And what I love is about yoga is that there are these tools that give us self-awareness, and self-awareness impacts us so much, especially in business. So once you recognize, hey, I may be feeling a little negative. I'm not happy in the morning times. On Sunday, I have the blues. Then you're able to determine kind of where you are. And not everyone is in burnout. Sometimes when people are negative, they actually have a high energy level, but that is sending them into what we call survival zone. And this is more of that stressful event, and it feels threatening, but you've got the energy, you're going, you just don't feel good about it. The burnout zone is where your feelings are negative and your energy is low. And that's where we feel a lot more of that defeat and depression. We also talk about positive energy and positive, feeling. And that's where, we're going. We're like, I'm ready. I'm optimistic. I'm motivated. Let's get this done. But we also need to spend a little bit of time in recovery zone. And recovery zone is not a negative energy level. It's more so that time where you don't have to be on. These are the things that you could do with your eyes closed. These are also the activities that we really need to plan in that give us energy, but that we can kind of get lost in the zone. This is like gardening for some people. For some people, it's running, where they're just taking a nice, relaxed run. They're not in a race. A race would be performance zone, but this is recovery. For some people, it's entering data. It doesn't take a lot of effort, but you're doing. You're recharging, your mind is in the zone, you're getting it done. And we don't spend enough time in recovery zone. But there was a challenge that I had with this model in the energy zones, specifically because it put us in buckets. And as I was looking and observing and working with my clients, I realized that we're not always in the same bucket. I may wake up in high performance, and then by lunchtime, when it's time for me to eat, I'm a little bit in survival. I'm excited I can still go, but if you don't feed me very soon, I'm going down fast. And so we started to look at energy as a pendulum and not an absolute. And that led us to taking a step back and saying, okay, so if I'm in the middle and I'm in that recovery zone, or really where I'm optimal, then all of my balls on the pendulum are at rest. And it's perfect if I'm swinging back and forth. So if I'm in my optimal zone, my recovery zone, and then I move out into stress, Stress doesn't have to be bad. You can have a high performance stress where you're stretching your muscles and you're getting better. And then you are, creating more space to be in optimal performance. But if I stay in either stress too long, then my pendulum is not working like it's supposed to. It's supposed to swing and it's designed to create some rest. But if I'm working so hard to keep it out and I never bring it back, then I end up in these burnout areas. So we have this expectation sometimes for high performing teams, but we keep people in high performance for so long that they burn out. And then we have these models of do more with less, and we keep them in that negative stress for so long that they burn out. So our responsibility truly as leaders in the organization, but also for ourselves, is to find enough time to get back into that recovery zone, right in the middle, in that white space where we're at optimal performance, right? You've got positive energy, but you've got positive attitude, but low energy. And you need that time to get back there. And that visual for my clients actually shifted the way that we were doing performance reviews. And that shift actually came where they set goals for their teams. And every quarter, they were expected to meet these goals. And those goals were specifically stretch goals, which kept them in high performance. And they realized that they were actually rewarding high performance stress. They were rewarding getting into that burnout zone versus setting realistic goals that were needed for the business to operate and not rewarding and starting to reward for that recovery. Or I had one client who said, every quarter, I do not expect you to meet this stretch goal. These are the quarters. We have 2 quarters that we need to meet these high, these stretch goals for billable hours. And then the other 2, I need you to be on target. And that was really a shift in how they took a look at rewarding burnout. So understanding that there was a pendulum, some people really performed in the 4th quarter, but what they realized afterwards is that people were motivated at the beginning of the year. And for the first half of the year, people really hit their goals. And then in the summer, during the second and really the 3rd quarter, and towards the end of the 2nd quarter, people were taking more vacation. They had more time to just get out. So really important to really take a look that we're not always in buckets. We need to plan for where our stressors are going to come and plan to be in that optimal performance. A couple of tools. I found this one, the stress bucket, really fascinating to evaluate where you are. And this is something that was offered through the Mental Health UK. Love it. What size and shape is the size of your stress bucket? How full is it? How are you handling this stress? And are you relaxed? Is it normal or is it overflowing? And then on the right, there is another just checklist to say, hey, am I feeling burnt out? This checklist actually has multiple pages and an assessment at the end to add up numbers and really kind of see if you're feeling in those zones. All right, control, our last bit. I promised you we would come back to plan. And this is so important. Plan and stick to it. What I hear often from occupational hygienists is that we are firefighters and we are always putting out fires. We don't get to work as much in the prevention zone because we're always getting the call. Hey, I need you. Hey, something just happened. Hey, this is going on. and we're constantly fighting. What we can do is utilize a strategy, an effective strategy that creates the opportunities of what we need to plan, but then also sets boundaries for us. So the plan itself needs to be robust and have a vision. And then strategic objectives. And strategic objectives are developed by solving problems and solving the right problem. So diagnosing and solving the right problem and having an outcome for that problem that you're solving. And how you solve that problem is where we create boundaries. So a lot of times we go out and we say our plan is to prevent negative health outcomes. Great. Let's get a little bit more specific. How will you do that? Will you do that with safety professionals? Will you do that through evaluations, through risk assessments? How will you identify what needs to get done, what absolutely needs to get done, and how you'll do it? Like with consultants, how are you making that happen? So your boundaries is asking the questions and defining the statements of what you will do, what you will not do, right? So what you can do and what you would do with more resources. And a lot of times we miss that last section, but you need to know what you won't do. So if your objective is to mitigate negative health outcomes, chronic health outcomes, then you need to know that you will not be charging fire extinguishers. And it sounds silly, but I know people that have gone in and said, hey, that's what I'm doing. Someone asked and I said, okay, but it doesn't actually go with the strategic objectives. And then setting clear expectations. When we communicate, we need to communicate what it is that people need to do, ourselves included, what the consequences are of not doing it. Are people going to be held accountable? Does it put us off cycle? Is it going to set us outside of our deadline? You need to know those things, and you need feedback that people who have heard the expectations actually got them to what you said. So that feedback loop has to be completed in order for us to truly set those clear expectations and to get the plan done. And then a couple of tools, again, Mental Health UK just had such great tools. Managing stress and building resilience in the workplace. I really love this tool because it gave different scenarios, and then one for the employee, one for the manager, recommendations. So that was really, really helpful. And if you click on that in the PowerPoint, you will be able to go right to that resource. But the other tool was the individual. And this was a multi-page tool, but it took well-being to anticipate specifically for us of what does it look like for you in work and outside of work. So identifying that and being able to plan around taking care of your own well-being was so, so important. I highly recommend that any manager give this to their teams, not as, a requirement, but as a tool for them to identify and offer that space for them to say, hey, these are areas that I could utilize some help as well. It was a lot of information. However, if there are certain things that I can leave with you, it would be these four. First, toxic workplaces multiply burnout. So really take a look at those workplace practices, especially for our managers, of creating a plan around that to increase the morale and increase the positive behavior and impact on business. Recovery is individual, but prevention is systematic. Each person will experience burnout in a different way if they experience it, but prevention is a function of the organization. This is where our plan, and stick to it comes in significantly, because the organization is responsible for creating the environment and the response. So what you choose to do, how you choose to handle those areas of burnout is directly a function of the organization. And then energy is on a pendulum. So it's not just, hey, I woke up in a good mood today. You're stuck. You're staying in that good mood all day. This is a pendulum. It goes back and forth. You may be feeling high energy, high mood and attitude, and then the next moment feeling some low energy, low attitude. So understanding that it can shift and sway throughout the day, and knowing what those well-being controls are for you as an individual. And then for the organization, understanding the season that your group is in. If you have some high stress work that needs to get done, that's where you plan to create some opportunity for recovery so that people can really have high engagement in their work. All that in understanding, what is your impact on business? Are you in burnout? Are you having that impact on business? Do you have a toxic workplace? Is there something there that could shift? And for our managers, how are you leading your organization to create the environment for positive behavior to have that positive impact on business? All right. We've got 8 minutes and I am open for questions.
Thank you very much. Great presentation. And yeah, it just shows that, we are equipped with these tools. We do have them, but for some reason, we're not really willing to apply them to ourselves. We're good with investigating, we're good with anticipating bad stuff, we're good with evaluating, controlling, but it always, in our line of work, it is faced outwards. What's stopping us from applying the same tools inwards to examine your mind, your body as a place of work where your mind is working, and apply same principles? So it was great to see how this can be done. I think it's a relatively simple switch once you get it, but you just need to be comfortable with that idea that it is possible.
Absolutely. And I see lots of comments. Thank you guys for such incredible engagement. I appreciate you so much. It's different layers to this, right? So this is what I provided to you guys is so surface level of just kind of out there. But there are different experiences. And there was one comment in particular that said, what about the executives that need to own this for their people and not embrace this negative workplace and these conditions that really create burnout? And you're absolutely right. It is a function of well-being. There is the Society of Total Worker Health that really helps to dive a little bit deeper in the various functions. There are also opportunities that once you recognize that it's there, not everyone recognizes it, and then they don't have the tools to get it done. So some of it is grassroots effort where we're building from the bottom up, but truly our executives need to have the tools in place to say we care more about our people than shareholder value. And yes, Celeste, ISO 45003 really addresses the psychological safety and creating and mental health in the workplace as well. So thank you for that, Celeste. Yes, I will share the presentation. My only ask of you guys is that you keep it within, that you don't take it and use it for your own presentations. So that is my only ask, but I would love to share this with you. What's so important to me is that more people get the information, because it's so important. I'm going to say this. I literally think we help save the world. Like, when people are able to produce and they're able to innovate, they do incredible things. But it's hard to do that if you don't have clean drinking water, if your workplace creates illness, or you're constantly in fear of losing um, like a limb or your life from the work that you're doing. And we impact that, right? When you're not in stress because of where you are in the environment, that's a big deal. So I have just such a deep passion for what we do, and I want you guys to all be in good zones, that you can be passionate, so that you can produce, so that you can also innovate in our space. Let's see.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
there was one question from Mohammed. I think it's just short MOHD. Apologies if it's not your full name, but I think the question reads, how for us to do self-healing? I think he refers to, once the burnout has occurred, what is the way out?
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone's burnout recovery will look different. I want to be very clear about that. There is no cut and paste to that. I also want to share that if you are experiencing burnout and you don't have the right tools to recover from burnout, even if you leave your job, you may still be in burnout, or you may find your way back into that space. So there was a tool on there on the last page where it talked about my well-being plan. And I think that was an excellent tool. It talks about what will happen, what you will do inside of work, outside of work, and in different functions of your life that really fill your cup and make you feel full. And then the second piece to that is understanding your values and boundaries, so that you know where your limits are. And then I would not be me if I did not mention meditation. But some type of self-awareness practice. Meditation is one of the easiest ways to tap into that self-awareness of observing yourself and where you are. But any type of reflection or journaling, all of those are definitely great ways to identify where you are, but then understanding on that well-being plan what can help you shift into that next space.
Thank you, Sabina. We have a hand raised from Nick Bonakowski. Nick, did you want to unmute?
Hi there. Thanks so much for the excellent presentation. I was just wondering, like in your example where you talked about the kind of like the third party, the ISO coming in, have you seen through your coaching work examples of when you're able to get, kind of buy-in from a senior level around changing those health and safety practices, or recognizing the importance of integrating that work into, every manager's kind of, responsibility, like you talked about. Have you seen examples of that being embraced when there isn't pressure from like a third party, or it, arising out of a critical incident?
Yes. So, and not necessarily with coaching, but in strategy consulting. So this could be a whole extra like half day presentation. But when we're doing strategy, we have three kind of kernels that we work with, and it's diagnose the right problems, what your approach will be. So that was where we talked about the boundaries, what you will do, what you will not do. And then cohesive action. So these are the actions that will be taken. And when you do those three kernels, one of the areas especially in the approach, is identifying the right resources in order to hit those objectives. And it's easiest to do when you are creating objectives that are proximate to the big picture, and that's to your executive team. What is it that they need, and how do you create your objectives in line with them? So now they have a reason for buy-in, because you're supporting them and what's important to them. When you're able to make that connection, it's so much, you get a lot more traction. And so it's really important. It takes some time. It's not an overnight deal, but it's also a lot harder if you're in a negative mind space. And that's why in the coaching that I do, we specifically talk about the behavior and that impact on business, because we can find those actionable things in between, and we can actually coach executives on that negative impact on business, what those actions are when whatever that block is present, that's not allowing them to support their health and safety teams. So it kind of goes in a circle, but it's the strategy piece that really makes the big difference in identifying the resources and making sure the executive team has signed off on it and it's proximate to their goals.
All right, shall we just squeeze in the last questions before we wrap it up?
Absolutely. And I apologize, there's so much going on in the chat, and I appreciate that as well.
So we got one from Peter Ribbons. He raised his hand. So Peter, stage is yours.
Great. Thank you very much for your excellent explanation. I'm an occupational health physician, and I worked quite a long time, and also in close cooperation as occupational hygienist. I'm now self-employed, and I work in Holland, in the Netherlands, and also as a coach. And I wonder, what is your is there any combination with occupational health physician? Because there is certainly an overlap, and I just wonder how what's your opinion about it?
Absolutely. So when I started my career in the United States Air Force, we actually worked hand in hand with our occupational health physicians. And it's a function of the Air Force that the occupational health physicians, public health, and occupational hygienists meet monthly to really talk about what's happening. Because when you are experiencing workforces and burnout, there is a likelihood that you will have more injuries, maybe less engagement in the rules and policies that are keeping people safe, and then just the mental health side of it as well. So honestly, and I brought it up briefly in the presentation, but the Society for Total Worker Health actually has a category for our occupational health physicians and medicine, because they all work in conjunction with each other. So we'll actually be much more successful if we're working all together with our well-being, our human resources, occupational hygiene, mental health professionals, public health professionals, occupational medicine. There's a function for all of them. It's just sometimes we don't have that luxury. So Peter, I hope that answers your question. I think
okay.
It's so important.
Yeah, great. It's good to hear that you focus on it. I'm very much interested in prevention of stress symptoms. I even wrote a book and also a specific method on it. And I noticed that part of your presentation just covers it too. So it's great to hear. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, and thank you for everything that you're doing as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Right. Well, They say time flies when you spend it with good people, which was definitely the case for this webinar. So we are now approaching the end, where I would like to use the opportunity to thank Sabine once again for delivering this excellent presentation to our international audience. I hope everyone learned something they could take away, start applying today to change their life for the better. And I would also like to thank Casella for sponsoring this webinar. Their support helps BOHS to advance its charitable mission and make a positive impact on workers' health. And finally, thank you, listeners, for turning in today. Without your support and engagement, these webinars would not be taking place. We value your presence, and I hope you will play your part in spreading the knowledge and awareness of occupational health and hygiene across the globe. So until next time, stay thoughtful and stay curious. Goodbye now.
Bye.